The house felt too large after my husband was gone. Every corner held his shadow, every chair still shaped by the way he used to sit. I had washed the black clothes from the funeral, but the sadness remained like a stain that no water could remove. At night, I reached for the empty side of the bed without thinking, and each time, the emptiness startled me like a cruel surprise. Grief does strange things to the heart of an old woman. It does not always burst out in tears. Sometimes it becomes very quiet. It settles into your bones and makes you feel tired in a way sleep can't fix. On the third day after his burial, the phone rang. The sound of it cut through the silence like a crack in glass. No one called our house anymore. All the condolences had already been said. All the prayers had already been whispered. I hesitated before picking it up. "This is Mr. Raghavan," the voice said. I recognized it immediately, my husband's boss. He was a powerful man, the kind who never wasted words and never spoke to people like me. "I found something," he said without greeting. "You must come to my office right now." My fingers tightened around the receiver. "Is something wrong?" I asked, though my voice came out smaller than I wanted it to. There was a pause just long enough to make my heart start racing. "And listen carefully," he added, his tone dropping lower. "Don't tell your son. And do not tell your daughter-in-law either. You could be in danger." Danger. At my age, that word feels strange. I had survived poverty, sickness, childbirth, and the slow ache of aging. But danger had never been whispered to me over a telephone. The line went dead. I sat there for a long time, staring at the wall where my husband's photograph hung. He looked calm in that picture, smiling in a way that never showed his worries. "What did you hide from me?" I whispered to the empty room. I wrapped my black shawl tightly around my shoulders. The air felt heavier outside, as if even the sky was mourning with me. The road felt unfamiliar even though I had walked it hundreds of times. My steps were slow but my thoughts were running fast. Why would his boss call me? Why would he warn me about my own family? As I got closer to the tall office building, my heart beat harder. The glass doors reflected an old woman I barely recognized, small, tired, dressed in grief. I felt like turning back. But something inside me shifted. For the first time since my husband died, I felt something other than sadness. Curiosity. Fear. A spark of strength I didn't know I still had. I climbed the steps slowly, each one feeling heavier than the last. When I reached the door, my hand trembled as I lifted it to knock. Before my knuckles touched the wood, the door opened. And that was the moment my world stopped breathing. I froze completely, because the person standing in front of me was the last person I ever expected to see there. For a few seconds I could not move. I could not speak. I could not even think. The world narrowed down to one small doorway and the face standing inside it. My daughter-in-law. She looked just as shocked as I felt. Her eyes widened, and her lips parted as though she wanted to say something but could not find the words. Behind her, I could see the tall shadow of my husband's boss. He stood a few steps back, watching us like someone observing a cracked mirror. "You?" I whispered. She stepped aside slightly, making way for me to enter, but she did not meet my eyes. The office smelled of leather and cold perfume. Everything looked expensive, polished, perfect. A world so far from my modest kitchen and worn-out sofa. I felt small inside those walls, like an old story that had been forgotten. "Why is she here?" I asked, my voice shaking as I looked at the boss. He walked toward his desk and picked up a thick brown folder. "This is why," he said quietly. My daughter-in-law's hands were clenched. I noticed the way her fingers trembled. For the first time I saw fear on her face. Not the kind of fear that cries or screams, the kind that lives inside and eats a person slowly. He placed the folder in front of me. Inside were papers. So many papers. Numbers, signatures, seals, things that looked like another language to me. "Your husband was not just an employee," the boss said. "He was a silent investor. A secret partner in this company." My lips trembled. My husband, who used to worry about the price of vegetables. My husband, who mended his own shoes instead of buying new ones. My husband, who pretended the world was simple. "This is not possible," I whispered. The boss pushed another paper toward me. "And these," he continued, "are documents your son signed." I looked at my daughter-in-law slowly. She finally raised her eyes to mine. And in that moment I saw guilt. Not hatred. Not anger. Guilt. For months, the boss said. They have been trying to move the shares. To take control while you were distracted by your husband's illness. My heart cracked in places I didn't know existed. My own child. The boy I carried inside my body. The daughter-in-law I defended in every argument. They thought I was already finished. My daughter-in-law took a small step toward me. "Ma, it wasn't supposed to be like this," she whispered. Her voice was shaking now. I wanted to shout. I wanted to slap the table. I wanted to scream until the walls fell down. But instead I felt very tired. I sat down in the chair slowly, holding the folder as if it weighed more than my whole life. All the small memories returned at once. The mornings I packed my son's lunch. The nights I waited for them to come home. The arguments I stayed silent through. They were not trying to save themselves. They were trying to erase me. The boss leaned forward. "You are still the legal owner," he said. "But you must act carefully. And quietly." That word quietly stayed with me. Because I had been quiet all my life. And now I understood something new. Silence was not weakness. Silence was a weapon. And I was finally learning how to hold it. That night, I did not tell anyone where I had been. I walked back to my small house in silence, carrying the heavy folder under my arm like a secret too large for my old heart. The streetlights flickered as I passed beneath them, and every shadow felt like it was watching me. I kept thinking of the word the boss had used. Quietly. I closed the door behind me and leaned against it, suddenly feeling older than I had ever felt before. The house smelled like cumin and dust and old memories. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt the same. I made tea the way I always did. 2 cups. One for me. One out of habit. The steam rose slowly, blurring my vision, or maybe that was the tears. I sat at the table and opened the folder again. I did not understand all the words. I did not understand all the numbers. But I understood enough. My husband had protected me in his own silent way. And my son was trying to undo it. That understanding hurt more than his death. I did not scream. I did not break things. I cried the way old women cry, quietly with a hand pressed to their mouth so the world would not hear. Then I wiped my face. And I began to think. For years I had been told what I could not do. "You are too old. You don't understand these things. Leave the decisions to us." That night I stopped believing them. The next morning I woke up early. Earlier than usual. The sky was still half asleep when I wrapped my shawl around me and stepped outside. I went to a small legal office 2 streets away. I had walked past it hundreds of times without ever imagining I would walk inside. The young lawyer looked surprised to see me. "I need help," I said simply. And for the first time I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt powerful. Over the next few days I learned how to be careful with my words. I learned how to listen more than I spoke. I learned how to ask questions that sounded small but meant everything. I moved like a shadow, unseen, unnoticed. My son and daughter-in-law laughed at dinner. They talked about bills and holidays and car repairs. They thought I was still just sitting in my grief. They did not notice my silence had changed. It was no longer empty. It was full of plans. At night, I talked to my husband's photograph. "You knew," I whispered. "Didn't you?" In his smile I imagined he was answering me. This was not about hatred. This was not about destroying them. This was about dignity. This was about a woman who had given her entire life to her family, learning, at last, to choose herself. I folded the papers carefully and placed them back into the folder. My hands were no longer trembling. My heart still ached. But underneath the ache there was something new. A quiet fire. And fires, even small ones, can change everything. People think revenge is loud. They imagine broken things, angry words, and shouting that shakes the walls. They think it looks like fire and sounds like thunder. But my revenge was not like that. Mine was soft. It came quietly, like the morning sun that enters the room without making a sound, yet changes everything. One morning I was called to the bank. The young man behind the counter smiled politely, but his eyes showed surprise as he looked at the papers I handed him. "These are very clear," he said. They were. Because I had learned to be clear. I watched the pen in my hand as I signed my name. For the first time in many years my hands did not shake. My name looked stronger on the paper, like it finally belonged to someone awake. At home nothing looked different. The same curtains. The same cups. The same old clock ticking on the wall. But I was different. The phone rang that afternoon. It was my son. "Ma," he said, his voice tight. "The accounts. Something is wrong." I said nothing. I let him speak. That was the power I had learned, to let silence make others feel what I had felt. That evening, he and my daughter-in-law stood in the doorway, the same doorway where I had once welcomed them with sweets and blessings. Now their faces were pale. "We can fix this," my daughter-in-law said quickly. "We were just trying to manage things." I looked at them. Really looked. I saw fear. But I also saw something else. Embarrassment. They had been caught. "I did not take anything that was not mine," I said softly. "I only accepted what your father wanted me to have." My son's shoulders dropped. He did not argue. He knew. That was enough for me. I did not throw them out. I did not shame them in front of others. I did not raise my voice. Because my revenge wasn't meant to wound. It was meant to teach. From that day I began living differently. Not louder. Not crueler. Just stronger. I donated quietly. I helped women who had been fooled like I almost was. I learned to read more carefully, to ask more questions, to sit at the table where decisions were made. They started asking me before doing anything important. "Ma, what do you think?" That was my victory. Not their fear. Their respect. Now, when I sit by my window and watch the world move slowly, I feel my husband beside me in the soft ways that matter. In the morning light. In the warm cup of tea. In the strength in my spine. If someone asks me about revenge, I smile. Because they expect a dark story. But my story is not dark. It is gentle. It is patient. It is sweet. And it belongs to a grandmother who finally learned that kindness and courage can live in the same heart. That is the kind of revenge that lasts forever.